Overseer Krinthal had seen many prisoners break in his 40 years running the detention block beneath the Zharon Compact's central garrison. He had seen soldiers weep, beg, and scream long before their interrogations even began. So when the human was dragged into cell block 7, bleeding from a wound that should have killed her twice over, Krin expected the same. Instead, she looked up at him, wiped blood from her split lip with the back of her hand, and smiled. "You're going to regret leaving me alive," she said, her voice steady despite 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder that hung wrong at her side. "Not because I'm dangerous, because I'm patient." Krin laughed, a short, dismissive bark that echoed off the cell's reinforced walls. His species, the Zharon, stood 2.5 meters tall on average, built from generations of selective breeding for war, their chitinous armor plating thick enough to shrug off small arms fire. This human barely reached his chest, and she was chained to a wall with 3 broken bones. "Patient," he repeated. "You are a prisoner of the Zharon Compact. In 6 days, when the tribunal convenes, you will be executed as an example to your fleet. There is nothing patience will buy you here." 6, she said, and something in her tone made his laughter falter. "That's plenty of time." He didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. Not until 3 days later, when he discovered that 11 of his most loyal guards had quietly begun refusing direct orders, not out of rebellion, but out of something far stranger, respect. None of this had begun in a prison cell. 3 weeks earlier, the human military transport, Halcyon, had been ambushed while escorting a civilian evacuation convoy through the Meridian Corridor, a disputed stretch of space claimed by both the Terran Coalition and the expanding Zharon Compact. What should have been a routine escort mission turned into a slaughter within minutes. 4 Zharon war cruisers against a single lightly armed transport, and its skeleton crew of 30. Sergeant Elena Cruz had not been the ranking officer aboard the Halcyon. She had been a squad leader, assigned to convoy security, trained for boarding actions and small unit tactics, not fleet command. But when the Halcyon Stall's captain took a plasma round through the chest in the opening seconds of the ambush, and the ship's systems began failing one by one under sustained fire, someone had to make the decisions that would determine whether 300 civilians lived or died. "We can't win this fight," her communications officer, a nervous young man named Private Okafor, said as alarms shrieked around them. 4 cruisers, Sergeant. We don't even have the firepower to scratch their paint." "We're not trying to win the fight," Elena said, already moving toward the shuttle bay, dragging emergency supplies with her. "We're trying to buy the evacuation convoy enough time to jump. That's a different math problem." What she did next would become the reason Zharon soldiers, generations later, still spoke her name with something between respect and unease. Elena organized what remained of the Halcyon's Marine detachment. 9 soldiers, none of them elite, none of them expecting to be legends, into a defense that shouldn't have worked. She used the ship's dying hull as cover, timed depressurization breaches to disorient boarding parties, and personally led 3 separate counterboarding actions against Zharon soldiers twice her size and 3 times her strength. But no one expected what happened next. In the final boarding action, with the evacuation convoy's jump drives finally charged and ready, Elena made a choice that no Zharon commander could comprehend. Facing a wounded Zharon soldier who had collapsed in the corridor after his armor failed, unable to continue fighting, she lowered her weapon instead of finishing him. "Why?" the soldier, a young officer named Vask Theron, rasped through his cracked helmet, certain this was some kind of trick. "Because you're not fighting anymore," Elena said simply. "I don't kill people who've already stopped." She left him alive, sealed the breach behind her, and continued the fight. The convoy jumped safely 30 seconds later. The Halcyon did not survive the battle, but Elena did, badly wounded, captured by Zharon boarding forces moments after the last civilian ship vanished into hyperspace. That wasn't even the biggest surprise. Vask Theron, the soldier she had spared, requested and was granted a place on the tribunal, assigned to process her execution. Not out of vengeance but out of a compulsion he couldn't fully explain even to himself. Something about the way she had looked at him in that corridor had unsettled every assumption 3 centuries of Zharon military doctrine had built into him. The Zharon believed, as an article of near religious faith, that mercy was a weakness bred out of failed warriors. Their entire culture was structured around a brutal, unforgiving hierarchy. The strong commanded, the weak served, and enemies who could not fight were simply obstacles to be cleared. A soldier who spared a helpless enemy was not honorable. She was inefficient, and yet Vask found himself standing outside Elena's cell 3 days into her captivity, unable to walk away. "You could have killed me," he said through the reinforced door. "It would have been faster, easier. No one would have questioned it." "I know," Elena said. "Then why didn't you?" Elena shifted against the wall, wincing at the movement of her broken ribs. "Because killing you wouldn't have made the convoy any safer. It would have just made me feel powerful for a second. That's not the same thing as winning." The truth stunned the entire garrison over the following days, though it began small, a whispered rumor among the guards assigned to her cell block, spreading the way uncomfortable truths always do. The human prisoner had not broken. She had not begged. She had instead spent her captivity doing something no Zharon prisoner had ever attempted. She treated her captors like people. She learned the names of the guards who brought her meals. She noticed when one of them, a younger soldier named Krissa, seemed to be favoring an injured leg, and quietly told the medic assigned to the block, even though it cost her nothing to stay silent. She answered Vask's increasingly frequent questions with patience instead of contempt, even when his questions bordered on interrogation. "Your people call this weakness," she told him during one of his visits, sitting on the cold floor of her cell, her broken arm finally set in a crude sling the guards had quietly, unofficially provided. "Where I'm from, we call it discipline. Anyone can kill when they're angry or afraid. It takes a lot more control to choose not to." The council had made a terrible mistake in scheduling her tribunal for 6 days out, because 6 days was more than enough time for a single human sergeant to unravel 3 centuries of Zharon's certainty about what strength actually meant. By the 5th day, Overseer Kryn Thal, the same guard who had laughed at her on the first night, found himself standing outside her cell in the deep watch hours, unable to sleep, turning her words over in his mind, like a stone he couldn't put down. "You have made my soldiers doubt things they have never doubted," he said, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it. "Discipline, loyalty, honor. These are not human inventions, Sergeant. We built our entire civilization on them." "Then you already know I'm not saying anything new," Elena said. "You just built them to only work in one direction. Strength over the weak, loyalty to the powerful. I'm telling you they work a lot better pointed the other way. Strength for the weak. Loyalty, earned not demanded." Everything changed in the next few seconds, though not through violence. Kryn Thal, 40 years a warden, a man who had never once questioned an execution order in his career, reached into his coat and withdrew a small data key. "The tribunal convenes in 19 hours, he said quietly. "I cannot stop it. But I can make certain the transport carrying you there passes through a corridor with reduced security. What you do after that is no longer my concern." "Why?" Elena asked, echoing the same question Vask had asked her days earlier. Kryn was silent for a long moment, his massive frame catching the dim light of the corridor in a way that made him look for once less like a warden and more like a tired old man carrying something heavy. "Because you have shown my soldiers something our own culture forgot to teach them," he finally said. "That strength earned through mercy outlasts strength demanded through fear. I am an old soldier, Sergeant. I have buried more warriors than I can count, and every one of them died believing fear was the only currency worth spending. You made me wonder, for the first time in 40 years, whether they died for the wrong reason." Elena looked at him for a long moment, saying nothing, because some silences didn't need filling. Then she said quietly, "I'm sorry for what that cost you to say out loud. It cost me less than staying silent would have." Kryn admitted, "I have little left to lose by admitting my civilization was wrong about one thing. What I could not live with was watching my soldiers learn to doubt everything I taught them, and doing nothing to help them find something better to believe instead. The escape, when it came, was almost anticlimactic compared to the war of ideas that had preceded it. Elena didn't fight her way free through blood and fire. She walked out through a corridor left deliberately unguarded, escorted, quietly, unofficially, by Vask Theron himself, who had requested reassignment to her transport detail, specifically for this purpose. "You're risking everything," Elena said as they moved through the empty corridor, her still healing ribs aching with every hurried step. "I know," Vask said. "I decided I'd rather risk everything for something true than keep everything for something I no longer believe." The Queen of the Zharon Compact. Matriarch Osaleth Ve, ruler of 11 war fleets and absolute authority over 300 years of unbroken military doctrine, did not learn of the escape until it was already complete. When she did, she summoned Kryn Thal to her throne room personally, expecting an execution order of her own to sign. Instead, she found an old warden who met her fury without flinching. "Explain yourself," she demanded. "I could tell you it was an oversight, Majesty," Kryn said, "but you would know I was lying, and I am too old to spend my final years as a liar." He met her eyes steadily. "I let her go because for the first time in 40 years of service, I met a soldier who frightened me more standing still and unarmed than any warrior I have ever faced with a weapon in hand. Not because of what she could do to us. Because of what she made us question about ourselves." Osaleth Ve said nothing for a long time, and when Kryn Thal finally left her throne room, he did not leave in chains. Sergeant Elena Cruz returned to Terran space 3 weeks later, quietly, without fanfare, refusing every offer of a medal or public recognition. She never spoke publicly about her captivity, and the official Terran Coalition report on the Halcyon incident remained heavily redacted for years. Even her own commanding officers never fully understood what had happened in that Zharon detention block, only that she had come home changed in ways that didn't show on any medical scan. Quieter, steadier, carrying herself like someone who had finally settled an argument she'd been having with the universe her whole career. But among Zharon soldiers, her name spread anyway. Not as a legend of conquest, but as a warning, whispered in barracks across the Compact, about a species that had learned to fight without losing themselves in the fighting. Years later, when the Terran Coalition and the Zharon Compact finally signed the first peace accord in their brief, bloody history, Vask Theron Kran stood among the honor guard as a decorated officer, having risen through ranks that once would have court-martialed him for treason. He kept a single memento from that assignment, tucked inside his uniform where no one else could see it. A worn data key, the same one Kryn Thal had once pressed into his hands, engraved with 7 words Elena Cruz had told him the night before her escape. "Strength that spares is strength that lasts." And somewhere across the stars, an entire empire that had once feared nothing had finally learned what it meant to respect something instead. Asterisk, if this story stayed with you, don't go far. The next one is already waiting. And it might be the most powerful one yet. See you there.